Hello, welcome to this presentation on the Spanish-American War and one of its biggest outcomes, the Philippine Insurrection. I'm going to specifically discuss the relationship between these events and American foreign policy, strategy, military strategy that is, and politics. The discussion will include a few newspaper sources that would also inform students taking a common American history course. Prior to the Spanish-American War in 1898, isolationism and neutrality defined American foreign policy, and there was no desire to capture and occupy territories overseas. In the late 1800s, however, advocates for a more aggressive, expansionist foreign policy emerged within the U.S. government. The war with Spain and perceived threats from other imperialist nations set the stage for a radical change in American foreign policy. In an 1898 article in the Manchester Guardian, a correspondent reported that America had shifted to a policy of retaining territory conquered during the war. Republican senators intended to annex Cuba, despite an earlier resolution with Spain that declared that the United States had no intentions to exercise jurisdiction over Cuba. Ohio Congressman and close friend to President McKinley, Charles Grosvenor, stated that the American flag would never be lowered after it had been raised over territory subdued by American arms. And so it was for the Philippines also when it was taken from Spain. The American military, however, soon found itself knee-deep in a fight against native nationalist insurgents who resisted American occupation of the territory after it was taken from Spain. This would be one of the American Army's earliest experiences with countering insurgents using guerrilla warfare and terrorist tactics, a scenario that the U.S. military would find itself increasingly facing after World War II all the way up till today. In a 1900 article in the Baltimore Sun, Commanding General Arthur MacArthur, not to be confused with his famous son Douglas MacArthur later in World War II, General MacArthur provided an up-close picture of the fighting on the ground in the Philippines. He reported that the conditions of the country supported the guerrilla tactics, enabling the insurgents to appear and disappear at their convenience. These tactics forced him to redistribute the army to increasingly scattered outposts, straining the soldiers to the full limit of endurance. He also added that over 1,000 American troops had been killed, wounded, or captured, and many more others suffered from diseases. In another New York Times article from 1904, former Secretary of War Elihu Root outlined military strategy and organizational reforms based on lessons learned from the Spanish-American War and the insurrection in the Philippines. The revision of the Sea Coast Defense Strategy, increased numbers of warships, the establishment of a general staff for directing education and training, and the establishment of a National Guard construct under the Army were just some of the changes and reforms that were made. And lastly, an article that I thought was interesting, given the hyper-partisanship and political infighting we see going on today. A 1904 New York Times article covers Secretary of War William Howard Taft in a speech defending the Republican Party and blaming the Democrats for the insurrection in the Philippines. He was responding to remarks made by Democratic presidential candidate Alton Judge Parker, who had criticized the Republicans' handling of the war and called for an overturning of the current policy on the Philippines. Sounds like a lot of sounds a lot like 2019. I guess some things never change. So that was a little bit about the Spanish-American War and the Philippine Insurrection in relation to foreign policy, strategy, and the politics of the time.